Hello, welcome to Sunday Night Prime. I'm Father Andrew Apostoli, a member of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this program. Before we get into tonight's program, which I'm sure you're going to find very, very interesting, I want to remind you that if you have any questions, any suggestions, any even ideas for future programs, please send your emails to sundaynightprime@ewtn.com. That's sundaynightprime@ewtn.com. Well, let me greet you with the greeting of St. Francis. May the Lord give you his peace. Well, today we're going to speak about someone most of you know, and that is Father Benedict Groeschel. You know his anniversary, his third anniversary of death, not that far away. So we decided to do a program to remind our viewing audience and listening audience about the greatness of Father Benedict. After all, he was the one who began the Sunday Night Prime. At that point, it was Sunday Night Live. Remember, he used to do, right from this studio, he would do his program and send it down there to Alabama, and then it would be sent all over the world, I guess, however they did it. But he certainly was a great man, and we'd like to remember him. You know, now I've been working in this as the host for the Sunday Night Prime for at least 3 years now, and I still get in the emails where people will mention, I miss Father Benedict. They loved him so much. So we thought maybe a nice tribute to remind you about him and some of the work that he began and that is now continuing. And that's why we have a very special guest for this program today. His name is Chris Bell. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Father Andrew. It's great to be here.
Are you the director of the Good Counsel of Homes?
Yes, and I say the co-founder because Father Benedict, we call the other co-founder of Good Counsel.
Mm-hmm. So you can see he worked very closely with Father Benedict on something that was very dear to Father Benedict's heart, and I know very dear to Chris Bell's heart. So we're going to talk about who he was, and even Chris will talk about how he knew him and the idea developing for Good Counsel Homes, and then where we are now, especially with concern for the homeless and the needy.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Father Benedict. How do you kind of sum him up? Well, when he passed away, we put out a little holy card on him, and it mentioned about 4 things. I'm not sure if I got them all exactly right here. I didn't have a copy of the card. But first of all, one of the things about him is he was certainly a very loyal Catholic. All through his life, he was always close to the church. He prayed the rosary as a young child, and, so he was someone who really lived his Catholic faith. And that came out later on in a very powerful way, didn't it?
Yes, and he knew at 7 years old. He had a religious experience that he talked about many times, being a little boy and seeing one of the nuns go to this apartment upstairs with an elderly woman. And he actually said he thought this elderly woman in his little mind was a witch because she had a little wart on her nose. And the only other witch he knew was the Disney character.
We hope that doesn't apply to anybody.
No,
not now.
Yeah. So he had that image, and there was a barber shop, a good Italian barber on the first floor in the apartments above. And he asked the barber, "Why does the nun go to the witch?" And he says, she takes care of her, and what she was doing was bringing a bowl of soup. So Father Benedict, in his youthful mischievousness, climbed the fire escape and peeked in, and he says, and the witch looked out at me, and that frightened him. She parted the curtains, she caught him on the fire escape. He ran into the church, St. Aloysius in Jersey City. He went before the statue of the Blessed Mother, was kneeling fervently, and he heard this voice. He said it was just an internal, instant voice that said, "Be a priest." And he got up and he felt some kind of courage and security. And he said he walked by the rectory and thought, well, I guess that's where I'm going to live, when I get older. And just had it, and it never wavered. Now, obviously, that was a youthful, interesting way that God spoke to him, but it also matured in his years.
Oh, yes. There's many ways that people get that first inkling.
Yes.
I remember somebody told me, said, when I was a little kid, my sister told me I should be a priest,
And today you think,
he's a priest.
So it happens. And if you ever saw that, we have a photo of him, as a young schoolboy, all dressed up, looking somewhat serious. And his high school classmates, like Charlie Kenworthy, whom we know today, said he was always a serious student. He was respectful to women, but he never flirted or dated at all, because he knew that he was being asked to be a priest. And his choice of the Franciscans against his father's encouragement to consider the Jesuits had everything to do with wanting to work with the poor. Even then, he had a desire. Yeah, he was from mostly middle class, Jersey City or
he was also
Caldwell area.
Yes.
Yeah. So it wasn't like he lived in poverty at all, but he had a heart. God gave him that heart for the poor. And when he entered the Franciscans, he did so with the full intention of being a servant to the poor. And isn't it interesting? I don't know who made the decision for him to go on to study psychology, which in the 60s was pretty new, I think, for religious to study psychology. But as you and I knew him as a psychologist, he didn't act like a doctor in any way. He was very much, he used that tool, that knowledge, to help others, myself included, and many other religious, certainly men, women, not only priests and nuns, but also bishops, archbishops, cardinals, whom he consulted. He used that knowledge and experience to aid the growth of the gospel and to serve Jesus Christ.
My brother, one of my brothers, Michael, knew him, and he said to me one day, he said, the real gift of Father Benedict was that he was able to combine the traditional teachings of the church, for example, the three ways, the purgative,
Yes.
the illuminative, unitive way, the teachings of Saint Teresa of Avila, the mansions, and Saint John of the Cross, and so on, the Dark Night. He was able to combine that with modern psychology,
Yes.
which it almost seemed like modern psychology is completely, it's without God. It's secular. But he was able to see how they come together.
And his first, and I think great book, and it's a seminal book, Spiritual Passages, was exactly that, explaining how psychology and spirituality can work together. And the great St. John Paul, did speak often of a Christian psychology which takes into account the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. And it's integrating, because God made us one, and he made us with emotions and with a brain and with a body. And it's only in integrating these elements that we can be a whole and holy person. And
Right.
I think Father Benedict saw that. And he didn't see it only in what I would say are well-balanced, ordinary folks. He saw it in his own patron saint, the name he was given, Benedict Joseph Lebray, whom we know was a homeless follower of the gospel. And he entered like 13 communities and was rejected because Benedict Joseph Lebray, Saint Benedict Joseph, was really a little crazy, a little pazzo, as they say in Italy. He lived in the street, he begged for food, and he gave away what he begged. But Father Benedict could see, you don't have to be completely whatever. In fact, he joked about what normal means. You know, normal in Times Square is talking to yourself. You know, you're walking around like most people. The norm is the average. So you take the average person around there, and they're walking around talking to themselves. So, but it's not about normalcy. It's about balance. It's about integrating faith into one's life. And I know he even saw in people whom others might say are a little, unbalanced, that he could see God working and using them. I think he did in me anyway.
Well, he certainly led an awful lot of people. He was a great teacher, a preacher. He was EWTN, Mother Angelica called him, didn't he? I think you told me he was preaching in Europe?
In England. He was in England, got the phone call from Mother, and I think one of his questions was, how did you find me here? But she, and he would say of her, she was certainly very close to God, very close in her spirit, and obviously the fruits of her work are way beyond any human achievement.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And you know, he wrote 42 books. I mean, he was a scholar and everything, so he was loyal to the church. Let's go on and talk about one more quality before we have to take our break.
Sure.
And that is, he was a Franciscan brother. He loved the Franciscan charism, as you say, to work with the poor, St. Francis, working with the lepers, and, the Franciscans working that way. And, there's a funny story, but he lived in Caldwell, and he came down to Orange. Now, the church in Orange was a Capuchin church, but it was the Italian branch. And so the priest that he spoke to there had a very heavy Italian accent. See, the Capuchins in New York were from the German province background. Now, they spoke more English and so on. But Father Norberto was his name. And he said to Father Benedict, he said, now, he says, we have a house. This is his Italian accent. We have a house in Orange, and a hack and a zack, and a Passaic, and in Hoboken, and a Beacon, and a Granola Road. And it took him 5 years to figure out that Granola Road was Gun Hill Road in the Bronx. So then Father Norberto said to him, this is your name, Groeschel. That's no Italian name, no? No, Father, no, it's not Italian. He says, but your mother's Italian, no? He goes, no, Father, my mother's Irish. He says, you like a lasagna? And Father Benedict answered Father Norberto, Father, I never eat that lasagna, and I never eat that. You like a manicotti? Father, I don't even know what that is. He says, you eat spaghetti? And he said, no, Father, I don't. He says, you better go to the German province or you will starve her to death. So I always point out that's critical vocational discernment. But that's how he ended up in New York, and how the providence of God directed him.
Providence of God,
So he had many more opportunities in New York to develop, and as a psychologist and his work and so on.
Amazing.
So, but he guided many religious, started the reform of the Franciscan friars and the Sisters of the Renewal.
Well, you together. I mean, it's an amazing, I think, story that you and he have together, isn't it? And and you're even first meeting with him.
And you remember he had many. He guided many religious, remember, and he also said that it was very important for the conferences for religious, that they come. And so whenever he had conferences in different places, many religious attended them.
Yes, he had monthly conferences, and when he started, it may have been in the 60s, but certainly in the 70s, I was told that religious, particularly women religious, had to do a monthly day of recollection. And that's what he was offering for them in different locations, New York, New Jersey, Long Island. And I saw an early picture of that, and there was a church filled with habited nuns. So it shows you how far back that goes.
Yeah.
But then that transformed. He certainly changed with the times into more and more lay people.
Yeah.
And then he started the spiritual program for the laity. And you taught in that too, didn't
Yes,
you?
I did.
Yeah, and
very,
I was
very popular.
Yeah, and I became a product of that course. But you mentioned priests, and
Chris, we're going to just have to take a little
break,
break now.
okay.
Let's pick up on that when we get
will.
back, okay?
Okay.
We're going to take a break now, but don't go away. We've got so much interesting things to share with you.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Night Crime. I'm Father Andrew Apostoli, the host for this program, and our special guest is Chris Bell, who is the director of the Good Counsel Homes for the homeless. And also, too, wanted to mention that our topic is entitled, our title for this show is Father Benedict Groeschel, a Well-Beloved Priest. Okay, his anniversary is coming up fairly soon, and we thought it would be right to remember him because, you know, he's the one who founded this program. He used to do it live. He used to call it Father Benedict
Sunday Night
Live. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we want to remember him. Many people, when they send me their emails, many of them mention Father Benedict, how much they loved him and how much they miss him. So we thought it would be nice to do something to bring his memory back. Okay, we were talking about some quality. We looked at how he was very loyal in his Catholic faith, his vocation early in life. Franciscan, he was a Franciscan brother concerned for the order and so on. But the third quality we came to is a guide for priests. You were going to say something on that.
Yes, I meet priests today all over, not only in New York and New Jersey, whom he helped encourage, and I think some would even say form, either before or after ordination, to encourage their love for the church, love for the teachings of the faith, and also to help them navigate, you know, the waters of the culture that we're under attack here. We've always been under some form of attack, but in the 60s and 70s, the revolution that people would talk about, the sexual revolution, the feminist revolution, there was still a large, somewhat large and faith-filled church. And I think people took refuge in it. But that barrier has broken down. The faith-filled are fewer, and those that are seeking God and seeking Christ are having a very interesting time of it. But those that seek, as he's quoting a book here, those who seek will find. And those, certainly the gospel says, those who knock, the door will be open. And Father was helping priests to be open to and to survive through the trials and tribulations that were found both inside the church and outside, and also to be open to the faithful who are seeking in many different ways than for some of them when they were first ordained. And let us remember, you and he were ordained in a church that still was celebrating the Latin Mass, that its traditions had been sustained for hundreds of years and taken for granted. And then like a window slamming shut, everything seemed to change, like boom. And then what you knew as traditions just went by the wayside. And here's where Father Benedict's psychology and spirituality, I think, really shone. He recognized you can't throw everything out, because in doing that, you are actually removing what people need. Every human spirit we need heroes. We need examples. And that's what we find in the saints. And he always used the saints as examples to live a good life, to live a holy life, to live through troubled times. The saints always lived in troubled times. We're always in troubled times. And I think, too, he also saw that the human spirit needs rituals. He didn't always put it that way, but needs practices, needs a way to relate to God that's very tangible, very material. God made us flesh and blood. And it struck me when the great John Paul was Pope, how he, in so many ways, people called him old-fashioned, how he'd pray on his knees, he prayed the rosary, went to confession regularly. Yet these tangible actions help one deepen their spiritual life with God. I remember in one of Father Benedict's talks, he'd say, he'd talk about the good religious sister who's, praying her office and praying her rosary for 30, 40 years, and her life, it may have seemed kind of ordinary or even dull, but there she is with a deep spiritual life, maybe like St. Teresa of Avila, and after 30, 40 years, she's kind of banking in towards the glory of God and that union with God, which, becomes indescribable. And it's something to strive for at any age, age, right? And that love that grows with age, with a married couple, with a religious with God, it all is bringing us closer to union with the true love, who is God. And that's what I heard, and that's how I saw Father Benedict preaching and talking and encouraging all of us, no matter how troubled the situation was, to keep striving. And he'd say, he was slightly pessimistic. That was his attitude towards life. And he said, that helped him a lot, because when you don't think things are going to go right and they do, you're surprised with joy. And if they go a little bit worse, it's like, well, you expected it to go a little worse. So it's like you really, and isn't that the human condition? I mean, one of the funnier jokes he would say is, even when we sin badly. It's like we kind of stumble along. But God is so merciful. He wants to pick us up from wherever we're falling down and say, try again and again.
Well, remember Father Robert, who's now deceased, one of the early members of our community, the Friars of Renewal. He used to say that period after the council, he said, we had the Council, Vatican II, and that was the council in Rome that sought to reform the church. He said, but then we had, he called it Vatican too much. That was the turmoil that came after the council, and a lot of that disruption broke out. But remember, we know, and Bishop Sheehan was very instrumental in this, the many people that he converted, and particularly Belladad, who recruited men into the church to be priests who were really communist agents. And I think they were responsible for a lot of that turmoil. And then later on, we had other troubles, and but Bishop Sheehan used to say that if there is any key to the reform of the church and the salvation of souls today, he said it lies in the renewal of the priesthood. So Father Benedict was an exemplary priest, and he loved his priesthood, and
And Trinity Retreat, where he spent.
Please explain that a little bit.
Yeah, well, Cardinal Cook, God rest his soul, a servant of God, asked him to take over this house in a rather exclusive neighborhood, I might add, in Larchmont, on the water, and use it for priests. And Father Benedict, having his, counseling, psychology degree and insight, and I think Cardinal Cook saw in Father Benedict a priest and a man who could deeply assist those other priests who were struggling on all levels with all sorts of challenges. And I think one of the only moments I saw a little bit of pride in Father Benedict was when he talked about how many priests he brought back, priests who had left the church or left the priesthood, whether they were laicized or not. And he assisted, I think it was 36 or more. At the time he was telling me it was in the 30s. Priests he brought back. One man, this is so dramatic. He had been on retreat with Father Benedict for the week. And he had been outside the priesthood for I think well over a decade. And the last Mass they had together on retreat, Father Benedict asked him up to the altar. he couldn't officially concelebrate, but he was helping him
Because he
to
was
act
out of
yeah,
the church
out
at
of,
that
out of the
point, yeah.
church. But he was, I guess, trying to make him feel the love and also the feeling that I'm sure Father Benedict wanted him to have in the priesthood. That man, before he left Trinity Retreat House, had a heart attack and died. And, you know, it's certainly he's in the mercy of God, but as Father Benedict explained it, he was on his way back, you know, fully to embrace. And now he saw Christ, you know. Please God, he saw, and it was embraced by that. He certainly was embraced by the merciful Lord, and please God, he was reconciled completely, you know, at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
How many other people, I think, Father Benedict helped to reconcile and to assist in their journey? I certainly won't know, but that's where I think his greatest love was, in addition to the poor, was to helping priests.
Well, let's get to that one, because we're coming about 4 minutes toward the end of this segment, but we want to talk about his love for the poor and pro-life.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, he was somewhat famous for his turkey distribution on Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that, I think, was an outgrowth of his work at Children's Village. Now, I don't know all of this for a fact, but it seemed to me that Children's Village was where troubled kids were sent. And being the chaplain and also knowing a little bit more and understanding the kids that he was dealing with, he really got to know the families, usually single mothers. And he knew that a lot of them didn't have much around the holidays. So even when he left Children's Village and he was in Trinity, I know that he would collect turkeys and other food and he'd distribute it. And at first it was just him, but then it kept growing and growing, and I think hundreds of families. And he did this so long that it wasn't only the children who were now adults from Children's Village and their mothers, but it was like these guys, some of them had children, and he'd be there for them. And for Christmas, we had great Christmases and Thanksgiving together when Good Counsel opened, our home for mothers and babies. In the beginning, when it was only one home, we'd go up to Trinity, and he'd have all the fixings, and he'd have gifts for the kids. It was some of the best Christmases, because you could see that there was a love being shared with some young mothers, and certainly with their children, who never had a good Christmas before, who never had a Thanksgiving meal before. I don't know if we have enough time for, one girl asked me, could I go to confession? And Father Benedict was a little bit harried, making sure the food was out and everything was going. And he took Emily, you know, into the chapel, and what he later reflected on was just that, how alone she was in the world. You know, he asked her how she came to us, and did she have any other relatives? She didn't. She didn't have a relative in the world, only her baby. And it you know, deeply moved him. Every single person, I mean, he must have heard similar stories his whole life, but every single one touched his heart and made him want to do more. And that's what Good Counsel was about. And we'll talk all about his more direct action with trying to stop abortion too, maybe in that next segment.
Yeah.
We'll share. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that would be very, very important, Chris, because we want to show this aspect of his life that is not as well known. I think these other qualities, more general qualities, were known by a lot of people. But now his love of the poor and his love of, life, to protect life, to protect the poor. This is going to be very, very important. So let's stop here. Okay? We're going to be right back, but we've got some really interesting things to talk about, especially the Good Counsel homes that Father Benedict and Chris were co-founders. You're going to really enjoy that and be really edified by the love of the poor and the homeless. We'll be right back. Welcome to Sunday Night Prime. Welcome back, I should say. This is Father Andrew Apostoli, the host for this program, which is entitled Father Benedict Groeschel, a well-beloved priest. And our very special guest, one who knew him well and worked with him very closely, is Chris Bell, who is the director of the homes, the Our Lady of Good Counsel homes, that he co-founded with Father Benedict Groeschel. This is a part of Father Benedict's life that I'm not sure is that well known, but I know a lot of you know Father Benedict from EWTN. He founded this program, and you watched him for years. But now you'll see a part of this, a great priest and his love for the poor, which is really a great sign of love of God. So welcome again, Chris. And you worked with him on this program, but you wanted to share how you met him.
Yeah, the very first day I met him, I didn't know him, and I was living and working at a shelter in Times Square, helping homeless and runaway kids. And I was in a community, a lay prayer community. And one of the community members said, "Oh, we have Father Benedict Groeschel coming. He's a great preacher." Again, I had never heard of him. Well, that day, when I woke up and went into the shelter for young adults, there was a young man there who shouldn't have been there. I was asking him to leave, and he took a swipe at me, and then another counselor jumped on him, and there was all this rumbling going on, and it turned out that the young boy lost any other outreach services that he was supposed to get. He was on his way to a job program, and the counselor that was too rough with him, he got fired. And I just felt it was the worst day I had ever spent there. And Mass for us was 5:30 in the evening. I walked back to the chapel on 8th Avenue and 44th Street, and I'm looking down and I see that there's this visiting priest. I didn't even remember his name, and I think, oh no, if he tells us how great we are, how wonderful our kids are, I honestly thought to myself, I'm going to throw up. And he starts off by saying, and so I know it was the end of January, beginning of February, because he says, you know, Don Bosco, his feast is around now, and he's always seen with these cherubic kids. He says, and it looks like he has lovely, flock of young boys and girls that he's helping out. But the fact is, the kids he worked with were street kids. They were tough kids. They were like your kids. They were troubled. And my eyes opened up and I said, he understands. He knows what we're talking about. And then after Mass and after dinner, he gave a talk on the spiritual life. And you mentioned this at the beginning of this program. He talked about the three ways of the spiritual life: the purgative, the illuminative, and the unitive way. I had never heard about that. When I was a teenager, I was looking for, meditating in an Eastern way, because I had never heard that the Catholic Church had a tradition or had any knowledge or experience with meditation and unity with God.
By the way, I should point it just fits right in here, Chris. When I came to help on his courses that we talked about earlier, that's where I learned a lot about the three ways. He was kind of one who introduced me to a lot of it. And I had studied a lot of theology, but he really knew that, and he made it very real.
Well, and in making it real, we all should know that. I mean, we should grow up with that. and that was the first time I had heard that. And so I talked to him some more, not only that night, but I called him up and he said, come to one of my monthly days of recollection. I did. He said, come up to Trinity, and we did. And we talked some more. The long story short is I wound up going, not necessarily because of him, but through other circumstances, going to Rome to study for a year. And then I came back and I asked him to be my spiritual director. I got involved with the spiritual development program. And that's when I heard God say, as I was seeing more and more young women and children coming in off the streets of Times Square looking for help, open a home for mothers. And I, of course, talked to my spiritual director about that. And when he said, he didn't say it right away, but when he finally said, I'll help you, I felt like it was the voice of God saying, I'll help you. Because I had this fear. Here I was, a single 27-year-old boy who hadn't changed that many diapers. And I thought, wow, you know, can I really take care of women and children? But when he said, I'll help you, even my fears, I knew that God was there. And as I look back, because I was working with him, he wasn't on EWTN much in 1985, but he was known among the clergy, whom we had talked about, whom he had counseled.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every priest I had talked to said, oh, you're with Benedict? Great. You know, and they help me out a little bit, and they do something. I'm sure if it was just me on my own, you know, I wouldn't have gotten that first convent in Hoboken. I wouldn't have been able to speak in the parishes, which we still are speaking in parishes, to share about our help for homeless, pregnant women and children. And we opened up in 1985. We had 3 homes. The second one was in Spring Valley, which we had originally dubbed the Cardinal Cook Residence because of Cardinal Cook's also strong pro-life stance. By now we had Cardinal O'Connor in the Archdiocese, and he certainly was a wonderful voice and encouragement for us. Then we had a home on Staten Island. Spring Valley and Staten Island are still homes that are operating today. And today we're actually operating 7 homes, not only New York, New Jersey, but Connecticut and Alabama. But the one specialty home that I think really touched Father Benedict and I the most was what we call our Day Star program. And let me explain how that came about. In the beginning, when we opened up Good Counsel, we were getting referrals from mental health institutions. And in the very beginning, I took any woman in. But then I had some challenges with women who were coming from maybe a residential group home for mental illness where they didn't want a woman giving birth. And so when she came to us, she had the baby and they were leaving the baby, you know, maybe alone in the room or on the toilet seat. I said, wait a minute, we're just not staffed for this. We have our home where we help women go back to school and find a job. And we weren't capable, or I wasn't capable, and I was fearful. And I regret bitterly that I said no. Now, in saying no, we wouldn't take a woman who had a mental health illness. God still has a way of
saying yes.
Yeah, saying yes. But it took me a long time. It took almost 14 years. And women with mental illness, they would come into the home. They weren't diagnosed, or they didn't have a history. And so we kind of maneuvered, or we did our best to help them. But then I went to Father Benedict. I said, I think we need to consciously make a program. And we called it Day Star because at the end of Revelations, it is the Day Star that welcomes us. Mary is often referred to as the Day Star, the morning star. So we thought that this brought together the hope of the light for those who often, when they're hearing voices or they are depressed, they're in a dark tunnel, we want to offer them this light. And he said to me, call up my good friend, Dr. Dick Malone, who was at St. Vincent's Hospital in Harrison at the time. And when I wrote Dr. Malone, wrote him a letter, then I followed up with a phone call. And when we were talking, there was a stunned silence. And he said, you know, when I got your letter, and now that I'm speaking to you, I have to tell you that right before your contact, I had written as one of my goals for this year to help women and children. So Dr. Malone, who's also a faith-filled man, he's retired now, God bless him though, but he welcomed us at St. Vincent's Hospital, a hospital in Harrison, New York, which is a premier institution for the mentally ill. It's only there for psychological purposes. It was started by the Daughters of Charity longer than 120 years before we had gotten there. And then he eventually, Dr. Malone found a house for us on the property, and we opened up our Day Star home. And what we learned from taking in women there who have a mental health and or an addiction issue, usually it's a dual diagnosis, what we learned there, we now apply to all of our other 6 homes. So that in any home we have, through the grace of God and training our staff, we take in any woman who is pregnant and needs a place to stay, even if she has a mental health or an addiction issue. And it's really been a great blessing. And I remember Father Benedict visiting there after we were opening a while, holding the babies, talking to the moms, and saying, it works. It says, through the grace of God, it works, and it's needed. It certainly was needed, and let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think at the very end of his life, in fact, the year he died, he told the Good Counsel Board of Directors, which, by the way, he remained chairman of our board from 1985, from the very beginning until he passed away in October 3rd, 2014, when he left us, the same evening as St. Francis left us.
That's right. St. Francis died on the eve of the 3rd of October.
Right, after evening prayer. But Father Benedict told our board, just grow. When they asked him what should happen to Good Counsel, he said, just grow. And I think what he means by that is not only in terms of numbers of homes, but to grow the mission to help as many women as we can by teaching others to do the same. And we've helped homes in 8 other states open homes similar to ours. And we want to keep doing that because there's such a need today. And certainly it is to tell any woman who's in a crisis pregnancy, who thinks her only alternative is to have an abortion, which there's never, ever, ever a reason to do that. We're telling them, even if you need housing, even if you need to stay with us, we say for a year or longer, we'll help you, we'll get you back into school, find a job, we offer free daycare. And if you have mental health issues, you have addiction issues, we'll work with you one day at a time. And with the grace of God, we'll see more and more women saved from this horrible decision and babies born. And it's Father Benedict's encouragement from the beginning till right now. And I still talk to him a lot and ask him for help. And I still find a lot of encouragement in his words of wisdom and I think in his prayers. And that's why we are also back in Connecticut and in Alabama, and Lord knows where the next places will be. Mm-hmm. So I hope, by the way, people can find us at goodcounselhomes.org if you want to find out more information about our program. Good Counsel, that's C-O-U-N-S-E-L, homes with an S at the end of it, .org. And also if you know of a woman in a crisis pregnancy or needs a place to stay, anywhere in the U.S., 1-800, just anywhere in the U.S., call 1-800-723-8331. And I'll repeat that, 1-800-723-8331. And of course, you can like Good Counsel Homes on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and spread the good news about the gospel of life.
Very good. Yeah. Very good, Chris. Well, you could see the deep conviction of Father Benedict, and wasn't he almost like handpicked by God to deal with a situation of not only mothers and children, but where there might have been mental or emotional difficulties because he had the background to deal with that.
He had the background and the understanding, and one of the many lessons he taught me is, we're all fallen creatures, which means we all have defects in our mind, body, and spirit. Some are a little more obvious than others, but we're all fallen. Who am I to judge the lack or the inability of another? And God made and loved whoever we see, and it's really our call to help take the next good step, right? Help everybody take the next good step. He'd say that so often to me, and that's really what I take as sort of our motto at Good Counsel. Whoever we are, whether staff or residents, volunteers or benefactors, let's take the next good step in our spiritual life to draw closer to God. If you're praying, pray harder. If you're doing a good work, give it even more. If you're able to be generous, be extra generous. And if you're struggling, struggle in the right direction. I know that his love also for the mothers and babies and his desire to see abortion end was so great. Many people may not know or remember that he joined Operation Rescue on several occasions. But there was one particularly memorable one where after the friars were formed, he and Father Fidelis, along with Bishop Lynch, God rest his soul too, they went to the infamous abortion mill in Dobbs Ferry, New York. Just the three of them. And they sat down in the driveway, the only driveway where the women had to enter in order to go into this abortuary. And they sat peacefully and prayerfully, as all pro-life rescuers do. The police asked them to move, and they didn't. They said, we're here to stop the women from taking their children to be killed. And they were dragged away by the police, and they were incarcerated. And it wasn't an easy incarceration. They were strip searched, they were manhandled, they were treated certainly really not respectfully in any way, shape, or form. I don't know, the time wasn't long, it might have been a week or two, but it wasn't an easy time. And but he knows that it's a call that maybe many people are called to do, and to pray for. And he was always very sympathetic with rescue. And we rescued together back in 1988 when Operation Rescue first came to New York. And I actually heard about that through one of the then novices at Trinity, Father Harry Brock. Was my first introduction. He wasn't even a brother then, but he had been involved with Operation Rescue before. Yeah. So Father Benedict's, work, he put his body on the line, and he would encourage those to do as much as they can. And what we see at Good Counsel, for the women, people say, well, they ask the hard questions about abortion, rape and incest. And, we've seen women. I've seen a 14-year-old girl, who was brought to us by her mother, who was petrified because she knew, if she didn't know exactly what was going on, she certainly suspected a family member. And those who think, oh, she doesn't want that baby having an abortion, they actually don't understand. Most women, in the very few studies that have been done, I only really know of one on women who have been raped and then either had an abortion or planned an adoption or raised a child. I only know of one study. But in that study and in other anecdotal stories, many anecdotal stories, women who have been raped, they prefer to give birth, regardless of what society or the culture will tell you. Because I think there's a natural maternal instinct. And they understand much better than people who are yelling and screaming on the other side. They deeply understand that they carry a life in them, and that life is not a sinful life, that's an innocent baby. And even though that the man who perpetuated this hedonist crime, this evil deed, they don't want to visit that crime on their child. Mm-hmm. And this 14-year-old whom we took in gave birth, and because she gave birth, we were able to prosecute the appropriate relative. And that child was protected. Because what would have happened if she had an abortion? She would have been put right back into that situation, and the incest would have continued. And that's often what happens, is the abortion allows the perpetrator to continue his evil crime. It covers it up, it wipes it away. And so we know that in God's love and mercy, when you do the right thing, there is also an opportunity for healing and for wholeness. And that's why out of Good Counsel, we've developed the Lumina program, which is a post-abortion healing program. And Lumina is not only for the women at Good Counsel, it's not only for women nationally, but it's also for men and siblings who've experienced an abortion.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to stop this wonderful presentation you're doing here, Chris. It's so important to hear these things. I have not heard a lot of these little details, but I can understand where even a girl who's been raped might rather keep the baby because the baby's connected to her, and want to save the life of that child. It's not unthinkable. It's sometimes parents or other relatives, I don't want to be associated with this. It's evil.
That's right. That's right.
It's they have the problem, not the child necessarily.
Yeah.
So we should really pray for pro-life and protection against abortion, and for the really recognizing the dignity of life. Chris, I have to say thank you so much for your being here today,
you,
and
Father
bless
Andrew.
you in your work.
Yeah.
And let me give a little blessing.
Yeah.
Almighty God, we ask you to bless Chris and all those associated with Good Counsel Homes, for all the people who work for pro-life in a very special way, for all our visitors, listeners today, that they may be inspired by these wonderful examples, and to pray for Father Benedict. I bless you all in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Well, come now to this part of the program, Chris, where we make our fund appeal. Mother set up EWTN in such a way that it has to be supported by the generosity of those who listen to it. And they hear wonderful messages like you presented today about the Good Counsel Homes and Father Benedict's real work and concern. So we ask you, help EWTN to stay on the airwaves, or I should say, what is it, TV waves? I'm not sure. But whatever it is, to keep it going, okay? So be as generous as you can with your prayers, of course, but also, too, with your any donation you can give. Be as generous as you can, because you're keeping a wonderful message of life and family going out to the world, which we need to hear today. So thank you so much, and God love you. The Lord will bless you for your kindness. Amen.